Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and call this meeting of the Board Governance Committee to order. We have a pretty straightforward agenda, which is just to share with the members the feedback we got from the fall engagement sessions and talk about how we incorporate that feedback into by some draft recommendations in alignment with our work plan timelines. So to make sure we have ample time for sharing questions and discussion, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful staff to walk us through what we heard. I guess that was 2 Saturdays ago, 1 Saturday ago, some Saturdays ago. Darren, on to you.
Absolutely, and apologies for sending out those documents a little bit later than I wanted to. I'm going to share my screen, but first let me put in the chat the link to the documents in Assembly. So bear with me. I don't know why I don't
Aaron, they were also on the calendar invite. So.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Well, I'm going to thank past me for doing that. I try to help myself. I try to help future me every now and again. So I'm thanking past me. Okay, great. So just sharing my screen really quickly. What I'm going to show are just a compilation of results from the feedback sheet and on Assembly, and for those listening in the public, I shared out in Assembly the slides for context, but also the back to school event feedback form. And so people were asked on a scale to 1 to 5, how strongly do the listed takeaways resonate with you? And so thanking so much Caitlin and Morelia for putting this together. Unfortunately, I was not in this meeting to hear just the feedback that people shared, but I read through this and I'm going to give some quick takeaways from this.
And Darren, for context, can you just share where the takeaways came from?
Yes.
So if anyone has not been following us the full timeline, then they know that we didn't just make these up.
Absolutely. So on this sheet are 8 takeaways. Those takeaways came from previous engagements last year, the 2021 fall engagement, just reaching out and asking a number of questions around experiences with the education system in DC, as well as ways to improve the education system. This is followed by this year having a district-wide survey, as well as two focus groups and one-on-one interviews with English and Spanish speaking individuals. From that, and from 2 reports that came out of that, were 8 takeaways. And so 2 Saturdays ago, during the State Board Back to School event, Board Governance Committee presented 8 takeaways from community feedback and engagement, and asked for people to provide whether like how strongly they agreed with them, how they resonated with them. And so that's what I'll be building or discussing with these materials. And then later on, Ebony Rose, you'll discuss the next steps around these. So just very quickly, what I'm sharing with you are just highlights and a synthesis of the feedback from the back to school event. So in total, there were 20 collected paper responses. The highest ranked takeaways were takeaway number 2, which was DC residents are aware of some DC education agencies' offices by name, but are not aware of their specific roles within the DC education system. There's very little awareness of agencies, of offices. Residents perceive the education governance system and structure to be overwhelming and difficult to navigate, even for the most informed and involved parents, caregivers. And so they got a mean score of 4.63. And And so that, as well as takeaway number 8, which is the education system in DC should focus on ensuring equitable, number 1, equitable funding and resources to schools, students, and educators. Number 2, all students access to well-rounded education. And 3, improving transparency in school data, including how funds are spent. So these were the top 2. On the far right column, you just see some of the notes and takeaways and comments from participants during this session. Just a few other things. So takeaways 1, 5, and 7. And again, these documents are available to the public, so I'm not going to go back and read all of this. But even though 1, 5, and 7 were the lowest ranked, just looking at all 8, it didn't seem like any of them fell below a 4 out of 5 on how strongly people resonated with them. And so just because they're low rated doesn't mean people did not agree with them. But there was further comments that might help frame finalizing recommendations around them. So again, 1, 5, let me just jump down here, and 7, yeah, had a mean score of 4. So nothing fell below 4. And I do want to note for, wait, was it 7? Yes, number 7. I do want to note one thing. DC residents asking for restructuring education governance and power dynamics. So rethinking mayoral control, increased school autonomy, removing bureaucracies, redundancies. This was scored a 4, but just looking at the feedback people shared, a lot of them said that they didn't have enough information or really knew enough to give a strong opinion about that. And so I do want to note that this is just a very complex and nuanced conversation. And so just really appreciate everyone who is involved in this, the surveys and the focus group. But those are like the key takeaways, just reading over these documents. And just lastly, recommendations 5 and 7 did not receive scores by all 20 participants. Takeaway 5 received 1 NA, and takeaway 7 received 5 NAs. And again, takeaway 7 was the structuring of the governance system. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but does anybody have any questions?
I have just one comment to your last point, Darren, about the restructuring. That once people heard about it, they sort of jumped up and sort of said, wow, yeah, I never knew that. And one in particular in the group that I was in, somebody sort of said, wow, I had no idea that we didn't elect a board. If I knew that, that would be my top issue. So it just goes to something we've talked about, which is if we want to get feedback on actual governance, going forward, we should put to people the realities and some options. So, I mean, that's sort of after I'm off the board, but I think that would be important because people just don't know.
Yeah, I think I have 2 thoughts about that. I'll start with the second part of your comment first. I mean, I do think we're getting to a place now where we will put forth like what we would want to see. We're getting closer to that. And I think that'll help some people engage. As the person who facilitated these and sat in all the sessions, I would not say that overwhelmingly, even as the conversation went on, that everyone said that restructuring was the way forward. I don't think, I know that wasn't the case. And
No, I said one person said that and other people sort of nodded their heads. That's what I said.
yes, I heard what you said. And I'm just adding to give context for given I was in all, what was it, 3 or 4 sessions? I'm saying that what Representative Wattenberg said was true for that person, but that was not the case across all sessions. We did ask people to keep their sheets for the entire time. So some people actually updated their sheets, and those updates will be captured here once they were able to hear more in the conversation. I was like, don't feel like this is not a test. Don't feel like what you walk in and put at first glance is what it has to be at the end of the day. And so I would say, yes, a lot of people were exposed. Some people did, just based on the conversations, move towards restructuring, but not everybody did. And for a variety of reasons. One of the things that Darren and I talked about is right now, like this particular section of feedback is like 20 responses. In our work plan, we don't have a bunch of time to go around and do a whole bunch more engagement around this at this point, but we're wondering if it makes sense to put forth recommendations and then have people engage around the recommendations to make it more tangible and keep us on our work plan timeline. I think one of the things that was, and it's the last thing I'll say before I just relinquish the space. One of the things that I thought was really important was since people came in saying, hey, like, I'm not so sure I have an opinion on mayoral control, or I'm not so sure I have an opinion on the structure, and either like put an NA or said it wasn't needed. I'm glad we didn't lead with that question, because I think it would have prevented a lot of people from talking about just what they did want to see, since some people were like, I don't even know what the structure is. Like they would have said, no, like I'm fine with the structure, or I'm fine with whatever. And so I think it was good that we got the amount that we engaged the way we did, because it helped people elevate and think for themselves around like where changes needed to be made. That if we just would have asked the question, do you want mayoral control or do you want to change in governance? A lot of people would have just said no. And it's not because that's not, something they thought would benefit them. They just hadn't thought enough about the issue or been exposed enough to the issue to identify what they would want for themselves. So I thought that was pretty enlightening. Other comments, questions about the feedback?
I would just say I'm curious to discuss more how we're going to extract recommendations from this, because I think the feedback is just at different levels. And by that meaning, like some of these are more framework level type ideas, and then others are much more specific. What I will say to the conversation we were just having, I would agree, not leading with the do you want mayoral control or not is the better approach. I think what we see though through the feedback is that respondents are saying they want a more centralized education system. They want parents, educators, et cetera, to have more voice and say in being able to provide feedback. And so again, I think it will be important to just discuss how we're going to extract meaning from the feedback that we did receive.
Would it be helpful, because I think having some of this conversation with the staff and like, how did we get to takeaways? Because a lot of the feedback and the feedback from the surveys and the focus groups essentially were boiled down to takeaways. We purposely did not call them recommendations because we did not want them to be confused with something that the board had voted on, because people are used to seeing recommendations, draft recommendations as things that the board has put forth as a whole. And we haven't done that process yet. So would it be helpful, but these would be almost like a first pass at recommendations. So would it be helpful to hear from Darren and Caitlin, how they extracted, or even some of the, like how they extracted all of the feedback we got to get to this point so we can continue to refine and narrow? Or are there other questions we should be asking ourselves?
I mean, for me, I think it would be just more helpful for us to just align on how we're going to go from the takeaway to what's next. I I trust the staff's judgment and ability to come up with this takeaway, and I think it's pretty straightforward. But if you take takeaway number 4, for instance, students, educators, parent or caregivers voice need a more streamlined approach to communication, more opportunities to give feedback, and greater transparency for how that feedback is utilized. I could imagine for the 4 of us, I'm looking at on the sort of 5 of us, we might come up with 5 different recommendations from that one takeaway. And so it could just be helpful for us to align on how we're going to get there. And maybe that's,
Well,
maybe that is what the board weighs in on, that we kind of collect on a range of recommendations and then kind of pick which one do you think is more in line with the spirit of the takeaway. So I guess it's more of a process question.
yeah, well, that's why I asked, would it be helpful, would it be helpful to how we, I feel like the 3 o'clock is kicking in with my brain, but I think that's why I asked, would it be helpful to use a similar process to how we like to continue to funnel, if that makes sense? Or if it's not that it yeah. Or if it's a different process, are we talking about we need to ask ourselves different questions, or in the getting there? Because there was a funneling process that led.
I think it's the latter. It's about the getting there. So for instance, one thought comes to mind / question, do we have participants' contact information? And it very well could be if the folk in this committee come up with what we think this takeaway represents in terms of a recommendation, we can then shoot it back to the people that responded to say, does this capture what you actually were trying to get at? Or do you think as a participant, this represents the spirit of this takeaway? As I guess what I'm getting at, what I don't want is that it then goes through either staff giving their interpretation only, or the board kind of spinning what we perceive to be participants' feedback to mean, without it actually incorporating a little bit of both.
So we do, we do have participants' feedback, and that's why. So this is one of the reasons I asked, would it be helpful to kind of revisit how we got here? Because one of the things we did with this going from the survey to the focus groups is and this was a recommendation from the Office of Racial Equity that we followed. We got to that list of participants because we said, hey, can we contact you to update you and keep you involved in this process? And people say yes. And so that's something we can and should absolutely do. And is how and again, it's the same narrowing. So what I hear you saying is, it would be helpful. One thing we can do in the narrowing is, again, to say, hey, here's where we are now. Does this sound right? But we would have to clean it up a little bit now that we have this section of takeaways. Is that right?
Yes. I think the committee should, and maybe our homework could be, come up with a list of recommendations based on these takeaways. And then we all compile, we share back with the participants, and then we kind of do a synthesizing from there.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth,
I would say I like that. The one thing I would say is, I think it can be a larger group of participants, not just the ones that were there, I hope. But
fair point.
But I like the idea of, we all contribute to turning these into some recommendations, some possible recommendations, and then getting feedback on them. I mean, and I think we should also go, I'm thinking the first thing I was thinking is it should be the broader group of participants, but I would think we would also go out to our constituents as well. And people around the city.
Well, I think a couple things. One, I think it might be helpful. I think, and this is maybe this is just helpful for me, but people can tell me if it's helpful for them as well. When I listened to people during the session, as part of the facilitation, there actually were tangible things that people said would or would not be helpful to them. It might actually be worth pulling out from the notes and from the responses to the takeaways, some of those things to include as recommendations. So I think that's one substantive thing that could happen. I want to be mindful, well, maybe not mindful. I think one of the things one of my wonderings is when we put forth, just like from a capacity timeline, how do we get the things done standpoint, if we have two options. We can say, we're going to put forth some recommendations and open the recommendations up for feedback to the broader, right? Or we could say we need some more feedback informing the recommendations and then put the recommendations forward. My suspicion is we probably have a smaller universe that we might want to tap for the informing how, like the getting from the takeaways to recommendations. And there's a larger universe that we want to engage as once we put forth the recommendations. But I don't know if I am hearing that correctly, and would like to hear some feedback to make sure we're aligned on that larger way forward or not.
Yeah, I think the latter is more in aligned. And I would just say the shooting things back to the participants from the back to school event could be very informal. Like i.e. Darren could just shoot an email, for instance, or we could do it. And then to your point, we get feedback on the broader set of recommendations. And the reason why I just keep going back to the participants, I just want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to make sure that we are sticking to the spirit of their feedback and not making recommendations spinning based on our own thoughts and perspectives.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And I think that's been the spirit that's kind of guided this process, which is why we've had so many types and rounds of feedback. It's literally like we try to construct a process where we are in conversation with the public, and that step of saying, all right, what do you think? And then like, did we hear you correctly? So I would see that as particularly important to maintain.
Question, and I know I'm talking a lot. I'm gonna monitor my airtime. Sorry, Ruth and Darren. But can you remind me when our hard deadline is to have these recommendations ready? I don't remember. And whenever the date, the reason why I am asking is because I do think, to Ruth's point, there does need to be, like, the feedback is going to depend on the level of engagement and education we can do on some of these things, especially when we get to like real complex matters. And I don't know if we have the time or capacity to do a full scale, like another round of public engagement on this. So it just might be helpful to think about, if we are going to just blast this out, for instance, say, give us feedback, how do we include that education component?
So we don't have the time and capacity to do another, and I guess it depends on what we consider full scale round of feedback. We don't have the time or capacity to do a full scale round of feedback. We are at a place where we said we would do a report, and we're supposed to have I'm making sure I'm not speaking out of turn from the work plan. We're supposed to have at the November public meeting, some expert panel and some witness testimony. We are supposed to finalize our report recommendations in, it says November, December, but it's really November. And then we would need a full vote from the board on the recommendations in December. I think that the following things are true. One, we have had in this process, like we've done a survey, we've done focus groups, we've actually gotten substantial feedback. And I don't want that to stop. And I want to be mindful of like, what is our capacity and what are our commitments and what are we calling like full engagement? Because it does, yeah. So we can go back to the universe that we've collected and hope to get some like written feedback. I will say one of the concerns that I have around that, and this is not a reason not to do it, but I think it's kind of a yes and it's just like it's an accessibility issue, right? So like even if we go back to our universe of people who filled out the survey, some of them may have the time and energy and capacity to respond in writing, and some of the people who we recognize as most marginalized, most affected by most all the things, that's not going to be the best way to get them to weigh in, and we know that. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't get some of the feedback, but how else? And is it like we have one more meeting? Is it we go to a couple of places? Is it like a roadshow lights type of thing? Or like what will we define as fuller engagement? Because I am a little worried that if it's just a blast to the participants that we have, that we're still going to get an overweighting of responses from, quite frankly, some of our most privileged and or most consistently engaged. And we set out from the beginning to say, how do we get closest to the margins?
I mean, part of this is redundant, and I'm sorry. I mean, I would recommend going through a process that's leads us to put together options that are responsive to what we've heard, because, people say they want to get communication. Let's give them 3 ways that would happen. They want a different way of responsiveness. Let's give them 3 ways that could happen. And then, we can turn those, it's more concrete for people to respond to. So I find that people are more responsive. And then what I would say in terms of reaching people, I think we should do what Empower Ed has done with, going out with the scans. And so you can just you can go out to community meetings, you can go out to before school. I mean, it just gives you a way to very simply and very easily get a lot of input from people who don't respond to the other kinds of communications. And also you can geographically target it. So that's all I got.
No, I hear you. What I am hearing is that we have a limited amount of time. We've had a robust amount of feedback, and we want to make sure that we're centering the voices of all neighbors, but especially those that are going to be most impacted by this. In my mind, what that translates to is wards 5, 7, and 8. And yes, I'm going to keep including 5 in that. What I would say is perhaps it could be a mixture. I agree. I think my recommended next steps would be that the committee comes up with a setup. Everybody does their own recommendations. We come back together and create a running list of that. And maybe the number is 3, it could be 2, whatever. And I actually would propose doing both blast out, and knowing we're not going to get everybody, but you will get some feedback on that. And then perhaps we do like engagement, like, as you said, Rose, where we maybe do 1 or 2 soft events, and not even events, but like pushing into existing meetings, whether that's a PTO meeting, whether that's an LSAT meeting or a civic or ANC meeting. I think there could be a range, and perhaps we say, we're going to do 2 or 3 in wards 5, 7, and 8 to really center the voices that might be most impacted, that could look very different. And so therefore we have the feedback from the blast that we would do, and therefore we're trying to go out for folk that might not engage in that way. I just want to underscore one. So that's an idea. Knowing that time is limited and we would need to do that, it sounds like by November 15th. I would be willing to own doing something in 5, and it would just, again, be pushing into an existing meeting, asking somebody, can we have 20 minutes of this meeting versus having the pressure of putting on something. To the earlier point, though, I still think we need to come back to how are we going to give context to whatever the recommendations are. I don't know if there's a single answer, but even if there are 3 ideas proposed, we're going to keep coming back to this idea that people have different levels of understanding, engagement, and appreciation for those recommendations, kind of like what we saw in the takeaways. And so maybe that's including an article, maybe it could be staff or board members recording a short video that we include a link. Obviously, if we're doing in-person conversations, we can color and add context to, but I just want to make sure we keep coming back to this. How are we going to, I don't want to use the word educate, but, you know, share context for what our recommendations mean for folk that may not have a full understanding of it.
Well, I don't know why you wouldn't want to use the word educate.
Yeah, it's just a little
But,
I
no,
don't
I'm
wanna-
just joking. I'm just joking.
I
It's
don't-
not,
I was-
everything is not that serious. Like, okay, so on like I think 2 things. I want to be very clear on who is the we that is taking ownership over this engagement. Because earlier in the what do we call it, engagement process, we did not have members take as much ownership as we would have liked around this. And for a variety of reasons, like so much is happening, like summer, all the different things, like our staff has been pulled in so many directions, all of those things. And I want to make sure that as we design, we are doing our best to be realistic about where we want to go and what we expect to get.
So
And
my
so that's
recommendation-
really
I'm
helpful.
sorry.
No. So that I think that's the first part. I think second, and this is what Darren showed, and I will take some ownership of this because I know the last couple of weeks I've been particularly underwater. It's probably helpful for members to go and look at all of the supporting documents because there are actually some concrete things in the feedback where people, so like I think about one of the recommendations was around communication, and there was a question around like, would a centralized website be helpful? That is a concrete thing, right? And some people said, well, yes, but a lot of people also said, which I understood when I heard them, maybe not, because it's still confusing and I would still have to navigate, or there are still literacy issues, or there's still digital divide issues, like those types of things. And so there are probably also things in addition to members distilling and interpreting. There are also probably concrete things in the notes that participants said that were not in our specific takeaways, but were given as feedback in response to our takeaways that should and could be listed as part of these recommendations. And again, I said I will take some ownership because we did not pull, and it's good that we're having these conversations because we did not pull those out ahead of time. And it probably would be good for members to have some time to digest, read, wrestle with those things that were not in the overview that are in the fuller notes and other things from the takeaways.
Nope. Yep, that makes sense. So what is the deadline that we need if we were to do feedback from the public? What would be the deadline by which we need that feedback? And so obviously we need a draft of something at the December working session if we're trying to take it up for a vote. So is mid-November fair? And I'm also thinking of staff's work capacity.
Yeah, well, that's what I was about to say. So like, it's probably, I feel like mid-November is pushing it, but I mean, maybe we should have a conversation about that offline before we, because I just know we have so many different balls moving, and I don't want in our our optimism for something to get dropped or for us to have to come back and say, oops, we heard from you, but we didn't get it like incorporated in time. That's like my worst nightmare. So I think that's a fair question. And I also want to put on the table that would we have the expectation, as you said, 5, 7, and 8, 5 and 7 are here, 8 is not, that the committee takes ownership over the engagements, or we would be asking the Ward 8 member to take ownership, and technically Representative Patterson isn't on the call, but he lives in Ward 8. Like I think there are some nuts and
I think
bolts.
it should be committee. I think it should be committee, and literally, I just think it could be we're joining ANC 7. I don't know, C whatever.
We're 8. It would be 8C or whatever. I just want to be clear as we walk out of this meeting, like what the steps are.
I mean, and it's an idea, but I just think, it would be great if Representative Reed would join, but I still think it would be the committee's work. We would share, here's a set of recommendations. We would give a little bit of context for folk. And then literally, if it's a virtual meeting, maybe ask people a thumbs up, thumbs down, or some type of voting mechanism. And it just gives us a little bit more extra data to deal with, in addition to us blasting something out to the survey respondents.
Yes, I don't disagree with that. This is why I say it's probably a yes and, but I do want to make sure that we're clear on the who and the what, because we.
Yeah, so I guess.
Can I raise one thing?
It would be open to everybody, but I think it should be committee led.
Thank you, Representative Wattenberg.
Yeah, the only thing that I want to just emphasize is it seems to me that part of what we're committed to and want to be committed to is using board resources as well to reach people who are the least likely to get involved. So I think it's great for the ward reps to do it, but I also think that insofar as we can, there's staff that has the ability to go into particular neighborhoods, go to particular events and do things that engage people or set up the meetings with the ANC. I'm just saying, I think it shouldn't all be on the ward members or the committee, the committee members in those wards, that we should also be trying to figure out how to apply broader resources. So maybe that doesn't make sense, but I just wanted to.
No, it's logical. It makes sense. And I do want to say that our staff has been awesome about going out to stuff, both the Office of the Student Advocate and the Ombudsman. Like they took the surveys out when they went to community events. They show up places. I've definitely seen them in 7. I've definitely seen them citywide. So I don't, because I know that people take stuff in bites. I don't want to give the impression that our staff has not done that. And I want to be very clear. I am concerned about our staff capacity, period. And I want to make sure the work gets done. But I also think it's particularly important as members of this committee who have to form recommendations. And we should go out. We should be at an ANC meeting or Ed Council meeting or wherever we're going to get this feedback, and we should hear those perspectives because it's great. Like I so appreciate Darren. I so appreciate Caitlin. I so appreciate every single fellow that has worked on the distillation. But it is something different when you go and you hear for yourself. And I appreciate you, Representative Wattenberg, for going out and doing that with the Ward 3 network group. I thought that was valuable. And I thought that absolutely boosted, but I totally think, given the capacity, given the timeline, given the everything else, I want to know what members are going to do to be representatives and go out and hear from people. That does not mean that the staff won't support, but I think that is absolutely important.
Yeah, I think it would be stronger, no offense to the staff, if members are doing it. And as I put in the comment, I actually think it would benefit if it could be a group as much as possible, like the committee as a group go to a meeting. And so that way there isn't bias or like Zach thinks this, so I'm saying the feedback that I heard in the meeting is that, because Ruth was there, Ebony Rose was there, Jock was there, Darren, whoever. I think if as much as we could do it as a group, the better, so we can have more synergy.
Correct. I mean, yeah, well, correct. I mean, it's as subjective as correct can be, right? So, I mean, I think, and again, when we did this in the prior round of feedback, it was like, you don't go by yourself, someone goes with you. So I sat in on the Ward 3 session, but clearly Representative Wattenberg led it. But it was beneficial for us to both hear, right? And I think we should use that practice again. And if it's the full committee that goes, that's awesome. And if it's at least one other person that goes, that's awesome too. And Darren has been just super consistent in being the person that's been in the room at like all times, which is probably impossible for anybody else. It's probably impossible for Darren, but he's been making the impossible happen. So I would agree with that, Representative Parker.
I could get with that. So last thing, and I'm going to shut up. So just being a stickler on dates and deadlines. So if we are saying hypothetically, Darren, and I know you're there behind the screen, let's say November 15th is that deadline. It seems like our homework, if we're agreeing as a committee to do this, we need to find some type of public engagement opportunity, perhaps in wards 5, 7, and 8 before the 15th to get that feedback. And then we need to also have something for folk to give feedback on.
Let me get back to you. We are taking notes on this. Let me get back to you. I definitely want to touch base with Alex on this as well.
Good.
But I mean, all great points, but I don't want to say anything definitive. So could I get back to you all offline on that?
I just want to make sure we meet the deadline in our project plan.
Yeah, my guess is, and I know Alex is out of office today. So my guess is probably the end of this week, like Friday or Monday, we might have a better sense of that, because it's not just, I hear you, Representative Parker, on the November 15th possibility of like, how do we get to the recommendation? But I think there are some smaller steps in there that we need to make sure are real, so that we're not jumping from like one rung to the next of the ladder. So like, I think that there's a deadline for like, both when the engagements happen, but also like having something, is it this same presentation? Like, is like, this could be totally be a 20-minute push-in presentation. I don't think we need to create anything new. Then we need so that would be my opinion. But I think it's this, but then you need a one where like the committee compiles, like not just compiles, but constructs. So like members say, right? And then you need one where like it's compiled. All of those things. But my guess is that we could use this presentation. That way we're not delaying and we're not adding anything to our staff's plates as the push-in presentation. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
So we don't have the recommendations. Is that the idea?
Say more, Representative Wattenberg.
No, before we were talking about taking all what we have now and each of us developing recommendations, talking together as a group, coming up with some recommendations, that was part of the next round. So are we now saying, no, it will just be what we did already?
So I think
I see Zach's run here, number 2, it does have the committee compiles recommendations, but that's different from if we just use the same presentation that we just did. That's all I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think the right answer, because we only got 20 people with this specific response to the takeaways. My guess is, and tell me if I'm hearing this right, but if we're going to do a roadshow light, it might actually be helpful to use this presentation and get a couple more response, like not a couple, but like more responses, because it was only 20. That's not a huge universe. And then we compile recommendations, or no?
My only challenge with that would be that we would then be back at square one, not having feedback on the recommendations before they went out.
Yeah.
But how do we, see, and I guess this is the place that I'm stuck. It's like, could we not, I think there are some things that we heard from people about like, I should put this. when we compiled the takeaways, we said we needed a step to say, did we hear this right? But we've only done that with 20 people.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Well, and all the people that we,
with those, sorry, and all the people that we what?
that we surveyed. I mean,
No, we didn't. This is so like all the people we surveyed and all the people that were in the focus groups, these were the takeaways from all of that. These were those takeaways. And so we compiled, Caitlin worked to put this together and compiled the takeaways. And we said, hey, are we hearing you, all the people we surveyed, all the people in the focus group correctly? But we've only done that with 20 people.
no, I'm just saying it's based on what came out of hundreds of others. So you can look at it either way. To me, we've had sort of input from hundreds, and then we take it another step and we get input from many more. So whatever you pick, but that's
Well,
how.
no, I'm not saying we didn't get input or their input doesn't matter. I'm talking about what we got input on. And so like, I thought like and it might be helpful to go back to the work plan. Like what we said was we were gonna essentially, we said we were gonna say, did we hear you correctly? We have only done the did we hear you correctly section with 20 people because that's how many people were in the fall engagement session total. They gave us feedback during that section, right? And so, and there were things that were concrete that came out of that. But my guess is if we did that with a few more people, we would have other things that are concrete that comes out of that. And so my question is it worth, especially given that like, we would have to wait, like we would all have to distill and compile, like, I guess I'm trying to take as much guesswork out as far as our filtering as possible. Just like, that's what I'm wrestling with. And so
Could we black out to the survey respondents? Like, this is what we heard from our most recent event. What would you add to this? Or which one of these takeaways do you agree with? And then from there, we kind of start trying to come up with recommendations to get to your point, because what I'm hearing you say is we need feedback from more people.
we do. Like, I hadn't thought about what it looks like to take what Caitlin put together and do it as like an email blast for people to respond to. So that's why I'm like, maybe, and I'm thinking through, which is why I also said maybe this is like the little version, like you essentially take it and you would get some more and then we could pull out the concrete things. I honestly don't think there's a way to skip some of the filtration is going to be at the committee level.
Mhm.
The other option, and like, that's just the truth. I also do wonder if, not wonder, I also am thinking if we do as a committee, like if we get more feedback on this section, as a committee, present draft recommendations and do it in advance enough of the December meeting, if there is something that people can give feedback on the draft recommendations. Like if there's a way to just like build that into the timeline.
I think
I
that
hear what you're saying, and I think it's important. I'm trying to figure out how to operationalize it.
could we, I mean, to get to more feedback, could we just do the engagement light instead of step 3 of like that be the first one? So we are still tasked with going back out, joining meetings to get some more responses, using the materials from the back to school event.
That's what I was thinking. That's what I had proposed.
But to what I'm hearing, but to Ruth's question, I guess what she was saying is, as I understand it, we would do that as a step 1, but still then go through the process of coming up with recommendations. I guess Ruth was asking, as I understood it, are we doing away with the recommendations altogether and just saying, got it.
I don't think so. I don't think we can. I mean, that's our task. So I don't think we can do away with them altogether. I'm thinking that we should do the lights before we do the, here's what our.
So why don't we ask all members to do it, and then as a committee, we execute like we said, like we are committed to doing this, and not to exclude Ward 3. Ruth, if you want to throw that in there, but we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And if members do it outside of the committee, great, but we would at least know we would have 3 events that we're going to get some more feedback at.
Yeah.
Council meetings or et cetera.
I would also add that maybe if there's a member who might wanna, might be willing to plug into a specific, like AJE is having an event or somewhere that some of the grandparents, some of the populations we've identified as most important to hear from, that might be an option too.
Yeah.
As opposed to like, let's say, I don't know, Alistair's like, I want to do it, but I don't have a Word 2 event to plug into, but I could go to this grandparents meeting that's happening, right? Like that.
I think that's spot on. I actually would not recommend members try and put on an event. I think it should just, let's
No, we're
push
not.
this. Yeah.
No. We can't, like, we don't have the capacity to do it. And if you're going to do something, do it well, you know?
Yeah.
And so we want to use what we have to get the most robust information we can get. And the right answer is to push in.
And as someone that did not sit on these sessions at the event, are we thinking we would just run that session again? Or, because what I'm thinking is we would take this takeaway document, maybe make it so it's accessible for folk and get additional feedback somehow on that.
Oh, so that's a good question. Like the takeaway document was part of the thing. So essentially what I did as a facilitator is I had slides where I essentially ran through what the charge of the committee was and how did we get here? Like what were they giving feedback to? And then I essentially had people fill out the sheets. Like that takeaway document looks like the sheets they filled out. They filled out the sheets, they ranked, and they told me for recommendation 1, I rank it from 1 to 5, like 1 being this least resonates with you, 5 being this most resonates with you. And then they added comments in that other column. And I took those sheets as like their exit tickets and we literally compiled the feedback. So what you see as that framework literally was the session.
And we need to just morph that so it could be done on Zoom potentially.
Correct. So like what you would do is essentially we could make that like a Google form or something that you could drop into the chat. We could have a second person and again, like we brought this up about multiple members attending. You would have a second person tag along to take notes. And then maybe you leave some time at the end because like this is the truncated version or the bridge version, right? Like you would have some time, depending on how much time you have, for people to give you like have what you capture in conversation. That's the way you turn it into a roadshow if you're at a virtual meeting. If you're not at a virtual meeting, you would essentially run it the same way we did at the fall engagement sessions. You would just move quicker. So it's literally built to be a roadshow too.
And that would need to happen, although Darren's going to follow up one time. I'm assuming sometime this month that we would need to execute that this month, because we would probably want to then distill what we learned in our November committee meeting.
My guess is it would be in roughly, because I think a meeting's on 30-day cycles. That's just how they work. So we've already missed the meetings. That would be the first week of October, right? And then you would need time for the committee the staff to distill. We can use that distillation to then, as the committee, say, here are our recommendations. We can also, if we get it done, assuming we get it done in time enough, we will present, and we will, because we have to. We will present at the working session, which also opens it up for people to give us feedback either show up at the public meeting and testify, or give us feedback in the interim. That way we can vote in December. Like there are a couple opportunities for feedback, and we can even update in the December working session on some of the feedback we've heard so far.
Cool.
Darren, tell us if we're saying crazy stuff.
I think it makes sense. I think one of the biggest things, like what I frame public engagement on is getting the most bang for your buck for these things. And so a lot of this makes sense, but just like the amount of work that gets in, like the more work you put into it, you should get an equal amount of feedback and quality feedback back. So just keeping that in mind with that. And I'm trying to look up the name of just past online tools that we've used to get feedback. So like having digital sticky notes, things like that, sharing that, just thinking of providing as much access as possible to getting feedback on recommendations. So again, let me touch base offline on that, but so far, I think it's good.
So before we assign something else, let's I think we're in at least have the bones of how to move forward with the recognition that Alex is going to weigh in as he should around just like capacity and what's real. So we can get so we can maintain a realistic timeline. Thank you, everybody, members, staff, for the engagement and the feedback around this, because this is what we needed to do at this section of the plan. Is there anything else that's like we did not, that's like, okay, cover? Because I feel like we tackled a lot.
Did tackle a lot. And
Yep.
I feel clear on that. Looking forward to learning more. The only question, and we could take it offline, is just how we're figuring out who we're going to invite as the part of the panel.
We haven't got to that yet. We should take that offline. It's just, it's a placeholder in our work plan. That was something we knew we wanted to do for two reasons. One, to help continue the conversation in a more public, like I know some people probably, I mean, I'm assuming it's not a bunch of people who tune in and listen to our committee meetings, but we should assume that a wider subsection is watching the public meetings, so to help continue to engage and inform around some of the ideas, but also to help bring the members along who are not on the committee, because we know we are dealing with a lot of stuff on the board, and we want to create that opportunity to kind of wet people's palates so they know, this is coming. There's some of the thinking and like how to help them engage. So that's the point of that panel. Yes, let's take it offline as far as the who to invite, how to invite, all the things. But that's why that placeholder was there. That's the purpose.
Cool.
And just to note on our end, the last week of October, much of staff and a few members will be going to the NASB conference. So just thinking about capacity, we'll be at the, yeah. Also, at the conference, maybe just looking out for any sessions on board, like something similar to education governance, and maybe what other state boards have done around this, around collecting feedback or anything around. I know DC is a completely different beast, but I just wanted to put it out there that I'll have my ear to the ground if there's any similar conversations going on.
Yeah.
Well,
I believe in my heart that we're special and magical, but I'm also biased. That being said, I do take your point that there might be things we can learn just around like how you like engagement, community feedback, how to get responsiveness on things that aren't the sexiest topics, like those types of things. So definitely will keep a lookout, because that's a problem for everybody everywhere. I don't know of a state that has completely figured out the community engagement game.
and then second, I know we have our working session next week, so I'm going to be putting together the committee report. I didn't know if you wanted to have a few extra minutes to discuss this during the working session, just using the committee report as a frame for this kind of conversation. But
Possibly, I think the first step is to hear back from Alex on like the capacity stuff. Because I want to be mindful of like what we need to elevate to when we're asking members to do things. Like if we're gonna, say, hey, can everybody all hands on deck? So yeah, like those types of things. I want to be clearer on that in what we report out.
okay. But yeah, those were the only things. And
Okay.
and also we're coming up to a new fiscal year, so any spending would be the new fiscal year.
Oh, yeah, I mean, we have spent all of our things that we have asked for. I am not sure what else we have as far as this committee in spending.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. That
I mean, we asked for the
Yeah.
bulk of, the big tranches of spending for us ended up being like the focus groups. We did the joint engagement, like those types of things, but I don't think we have anything else that is like board governance specific that we asked for funding for.
the following fiscal year, we've spent everything for this fiscal year.
Yeah.
For the following one, the only thing left that I can think of is the printing and translations of the recommendation, like that too.
That's once we get the stuff out though, right? Like,
Exactly.
yeah, I'm saying we don't have any other money that we've identified as far as the getting to the recommendations portion. We
Yeah.
do have money set aside for the creation and dissemination of the recommendations. Mhm.
That's the only thing I can think of. So
Okay. Anything else? Any other last things I
I
can
would
think
just say
of?
for the committee report, it's minor, but just referencing the project plan. As someone that cares a lot about deadlines, that would just be helpful to know like where we are as it relates to our project plan.
Mhm.
okay. Yeah, that's helpful.
Cool.
Okay, awesome. Well, I feel really good about where we are in the project plan, given that it was a super robust project plan. So kudos to all involved in that. Given that we're talking about deadlines and timelines, I'm happy to adjourn us so we can move on to our next set of deadlines and timelines for whatever else people have in their day. So thank you all again for all the engagement and the conversation. This was a very productive meeting. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Thank you, everybody.
Well, bye.
Bye.